Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Teri Zipper, CEO and Managing Partner at Sapient Insights Group. And I'm back for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. This is the show where we break down the big and most relevant HR issues of the day. We help you make sense of what they mean, and we talk about what you might do about them. Joining me today is Pete Tiliakos. Pete is an analyst, advisor, and founder at GXT Advisors. Welcome, Pete.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. I'm a big fan of Team Sapient.
Awesome. Well, Pete and I first met, I don't know if you remember this, it was 2018, I think we were at an OHUG event, if I'm remembering right.
HR Tech.
Was it HR Tech?
Yeah,
okay.
It was HR Tech. Yeah.
I knew it was one or the other, but that was our first introduction. And, in COVID years, that was only, 3 years ago? But, in COVID years, it's 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
So, Pete, do you want to maybe do a quick introduction of yourself?
Yeah, sure. That'd be great. So, Pete Tiliakos, I'm a longtime industry analyst. I've been, in this space as an analyst probably for almost 7 years now. And just have a deep background in HR and payroll transformation. I've literally spent my entire career in and around shared services, outsourcing, strategic advisory, consulting, that sort of thing. And then ultimately became an industry analyst. And now have formed GXT Advisors alongside Steve Goldberg, the legendary HCM technology analyst himself, and really just out there working with emerging and leading firms, vendor providers, that is, to help them shape their solutions, help them, boost their brand engagement and learn from, our expertise in all these years working with, consulting around, deploying in some cases, and even helping shape some of these solutions across the marketplace. So just having a really good time and love to be here and happy to have the opportunity to talk with you and Team Sapient.
Awesome. Well, Pete and I were having a conversation, I guess a couple of weeks ago, about HR systems, data, payroll, and the kitchen sink, and everything else we could throw into that conversation, and decided it would make for a great podcast conversation. So Pete, that's what I've kind of tailored my questions around today. Is that your recollection of how we got here?
Yeah, absolutely. We, like you said, we met in 2018, but I feel like we knew each other before just from being acquaintances on social media and some of the folks that we share friendships with. So it felt very natural. And I always love having conversations with leaders like yourself. It always sparks these offline moments that I feel like we should capture in a podcast. I know I do that in my own show. And I wish I would have had a recording of all these little moments. We could have already had the show in the can.
Yeah, just turn on the recording. I probably should do that more often.
There's so many offline great conversations that happen. I wish they were all shows.
Yeah. Well, as I like to say, and it sounds kind of hokey when it doesn't fit into the narrative real well, but let's get into the huddle.
Yeah.
So I don't talk a whole lot about it, but I started my career in payroll, my HR career, if you will, at a university. And we were in the midst of implementing some new technology. And that's when I realized what change management was all about and just how hard it was.
Yep. And
let's just say that professors, and particularly tenured professors, did not like change as it relates to payroll.
Imagine that.
And back then, nobody was working remotely. We had some people across 2 states because I live close to the Indiana state line, but things were a lot less complicated. And I recently worked with a small but fast-growing tech company in 2021 that was moving off of a PEO. And they were starting to realize just how complicated things had gotten and what it meant for them, given the decision they had made to not only allow people to work remotely, but to work from anywhere, including globally. So that meant big changes for payroll, among other things. What are some of I'm sure you saw the same thing in terms of payroll and the hybrid work environment. That's, the challenges this has created for payroll departments. What are you seeing in that space?
Yeah. Well, first, congratulations that you started your career there. I wish more HR executives would do a tenure of time in their career, particularly early in the payroll department. I think it's still so widely misunderstood what payroll actually does. In fact, I was reading today the Australian Payroll Association just put out their annual survey, and one of the things they were mentioning is the level of burnout in the payroll space, right? And they mentioned in there that about, I think it was 49%, 48.5% said a big contributor to that is their leadership not understanding what payroll does and what it takes, right? And I think what we all learned during the pandemic, right, if you shift, to that context, is that, hey, this is really complicated and it's also really, really, really important. There's a lot of, I think, overemphasis on talent and strategy and all the great things that have to go into making a company tick from a human capital management perspective. And it's just sort of assumed that payroll can make it all happen. And they generally do, right? They pull the rabbit out of the hat every week with limited investment, limited respect, right? Burnout, you name it, not immune to the talent loss that everyone has seen, the skills gaps. And yet they manage to get it done. And it's just assumed that they're going to do that, right? With all these limited means. And I think organizations, put their payroll operations to the full stress test during the pandemic, right? The resiliency of that, the ability to adapt to the moment of, hey, now we have people all over the place. We don't know where they are or what they're doing, right? I mean, there was a lot of struggle to get at data and a huge amount of angst around money movement that has changed the attitude towards where payments actually comes into play in payroll. And so, I think COVID woke everyone up to the fact that, hey, payroll actually is really critical. It's our Achilles tendon, really. If we can't pivot and move well, what's the point of being the super athlete, right? I'm using an analogy there for a business, but the point is, I think it was a big wake up call. And I think all of those things that I mentioned, compliance, data and money movement all became incredibly, incredibly important, but also incredibly difficult, even under the best circumstances. So yeah, it's a huge focus area now for modernization. And I think a huge area of emphasis when firms are looking at their organizational agility today.
Yeah. What are you seeing as some of the biggest challenges facing some of the payroll technology providers right now?
Yeah. The providers, I think for the providers, it's an incredibly intense time to be in the marketplace in terms of, while there's this immense amount of innovation and technology, where we're going into what I think is really going to be the golden age of payroll. And I think that there's that competition, right? I think that's one of the key things, providers are really trying to do is differentiate. That's probably first and foremost where they're focused, if you looked at it from their perspective. But I also think they're trying to keep up with all of the things that are coming into the marketplace, right? Because they're churning out innovation with payroll at the core of their business and their expertise all the time, right? As is expected. That's the whole reason why you go to these vendors is that turnkey innovation, right? Stepping into what should be the future of payroll. So keeping up with how do you bring things like ChatGPT into what as and when they're developing into your platforms. APIs, right, are advancing. We're seeing a lot more fintech around payroll. So all of these things, right, keeping up with that innovation and technology and bringing it closer to their vision and their roadmaps, I think is big. But also too, just that compliance, right? I mean, the compliance is really, really intense now. And if you have people working in many different locations, many of which are now global, even in smaller, younger firms, that's complicated. And the vendors are always having to stay ahead of that. Plus, we see a lot of ransomware threats, right? That's a big, big piece of what these vendors are doing too, is certainly keeping all that safe, protecting all that data, that rich data, and of course, making sure that organizations are stepping into that, very future-proof, resilient, secure model that's gonna fuel that agility that they need, to go forward. So from the vendor perspective, I'd say that's where the key focus areas are.
That's huge. I would say, we saw a little bit of that over the last couple of years, create some big problems for some of the vendors. And, it's not going to get any easier, right? Yeah. The more security we add, the more ways that people find to get around it.
Yeah, it's a business, right? The ransomware and all this it's turning out to be a very nefarious business. And we got to be very careful with that. They have huge responsibility when you think about the millions of people these providers are paying and supporting. It's immense. There's power in that data, but also danger in it as well.
Yeah. And it's so critical. I mean, I heard you on one of your podcasts earlier this year. I think might have been the first of the year. I heard you say that one of the things that organizations should do this year is refocus on existing talent and existing clients.
Yeah.
And thinking about that rings very true right now, given all the circumstances. But refocusing on that talent, I mean, payroll couldn't be a more important thing to get right. Like it's probably the single biggest thing that happens to an employee at work. And if their payroll is not right, their check is not right, or it's not there, or anything that kind of happens around that can just be devastating.
Yeah. I always think about payroll like I do. I'm gonna mess this up. The Apollo mission that had their slogan was mission failure is not an option. That's payroll, right? Like there's nothing other than 100% expected, and you just cannot perform any other way. So yeah, it's critical. And again, you can have all of the most amazing investments in HCM, the best talent, the best whatever. Think of it as a race car, right? Like best driver, best engine, best whatever. But if the wheels won't turn around, you know what I mean? Or they're not stable and they're not capable of handling that car, right? Think of payroll as the wheels, I guess you could say. You're not going to be very agile. You're not going very far, and you're definitely not going to go very fast. So, you've got to really look at payroll now as a foundational layer in both compliance and the business operations, but also, the employee experience and the practitioner experience and all the things that go with that. So yeah, it's immensely critical. And the data that sits in it is where the power is. If you can unlock that data and you can actionabilize, if that's a word, that data, it becomes incredibly helpful, especially when you start pairing it with other strategic data and other business operational data, and you start to look at all of it in context. It becomes a very powerful crystal ball in a lot of ways, right? That's where the predictive stuff can come in, and all the all the good stuff that you want from those things. So
yeah, that's a bit of the utopia that we've been striving for sometimes forever. Then there's always that next, like, you can almost reach the ring, right? Grabbing for that ring.
We got to stay agile. It's not enough to just sort of react. You have to get ahead, right, and be able to see around the corners. And I think that's where the beauty of all the analytics that we're seeing in the HR space is going to be very, very beneficial for that, for powering that strategic goals that the company has, from the human capital perspective.
Now, payroll is it's much more of a science than it is an art, but I think there's an art to it that has to be mastered in order to make it successful within the organization. And again, you don't hear about the good stuff. You hear about the bad stuff. Like, I didn't get my check, right? Nobody goes around and says, I got my check. It's, I didn't get my check. So, or my direct deposit. We still like to say checks, but yeah, I mean, it's that piece of it that makes it almost kind of invisible unless something goes wrong.
Yeah, you're right. It's sort of out of sight, out of mind. Nobody. I always say, no one needs payroll until they do, but it's true, right? It's not. You don't notice it when it's happening until it happens to you in some ways, right? It keeps saying these weird cliche things, but I like what you said about art and science. And if I'm not mistaken, don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the APA's annual Congress, which is coming up in May, I call it the Super Bowl of payroll. I believe that's their slogan for this year, art and science. And I think you're right. I think largely payroll is really science, right? It's math, it's compliance, it's algorithms of, if this, then that at every possible finite level you can imagine, from a government perspective. But the art, I think, is in where and how payroll leverages its data, leverages its expertise, and supports that's where the art comes in, is supporting its businesses, nuances, needs. And, I've been a practitioner early in my career, and had the CFO of a Fortune 500 company walk into my office on a Monday and go, hey, we just bought this thing and I need you to get them paid in 90 days. oh, by the way, they're on 5 systems and they're in 8 countries. Like, let me know what you need. And it's like, wait a minute, hold on, man. Like, what? We just got married? Like, what? What? Nobody called me? Like, and that's the thing that has to change, actually. Payroll should be involved in that from the beginning. And payroll should be a part of a seat at the table, right? Not the only seat, but one of the seats at the table, giving their perspectives on what this means from a compliance standpoint, how we execute it, contributing their data to help the organization get through that, successfully navigate. I shouldn't say get through, but successfully navigate the change impacts of that from a payroll perspective, right? And I think that's where payroll's art can come in, is that creativity, and that's where the role is. Like I'm sure you'll probably at some point talk about, and we have on our show. By the way, HR and Payroll 2.0. If you're looking for another great podcast on the topics, but we were talking about how roles are going to change, and I think with things like ChatGPT and generative AI, and I think it's going to have to become a much more creative, emotionally intelligent role. The work and the lifting will be done for you in payroll. And it's up to you to take that information and go and act upon it. Again, that art, I think, applying to your business's lens to say, how do I bring this to my leadership and help them, get the things done that they're trying to accomplish. And so, yeah, I think that's a great way of looking at it, art and science. Right?
Yeah, interesting. I think, listening to you made me think there's going to be a whole different set of skills that they're looking for.
Yeah, it is.
For the payroll department of the future.
Yeah,
right?
no, absolutely. Very, very much soft skill, I think, is what I think you're going to see, right? That creativity and intelligence, to emotional intelligence, leadership, negotiation, right? And being able to be a strategic advisor is going to be, I think, what the payroll role is going to look more like.
Yeah. We saw in the data last year that payroll and time entry were the 2 biggest HR techs that were ripe for turnover, partly for some of these reasons, right? I mean, people are looking for the next big thing. I think they were a lot struggling with the remote workforce. I think this on-demand pay is another area that, people are starting to realize that they need to support and offer that. What other challenges or opportunities do you see for the payroll department in general? Not just the technology. I think the technology that you mentioned, those are the things they're focused on. But what about the people in payroll? What are they struggling with most on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. No, I love your report. I cite it often, and you're right. I think you're seeing a lot of firms. I think a big part of that 50% are the firms that are going and looking now and saying, hey, we've kicked the can down the road for a long time when it comes to payroll. Payroll has been less than when it comes to a lot of things in the organization. And I think that the can got kicked down the road to the point that it got stressed and exposed when COVID happened, as we talked earlier. So yeah, I would say that the technology remains front of mind. When you look at when in my work in the surveys that I've done most recently, I see buyers bubbling up. Automation, productivity is a big piece, and certainly leveraging more of technology to help them do less manual work, less ticking and tying, and help them become more of a strategic advisor. But I think the other thing is too, I think payroll is under threat from all the same things we see across the marketplace, right? There's a lack of, not everybody, people aren't going to college or coming out of high school and going, I want to be a payroll manager someday. No one does that. I've never met one. And thankfully, the people who come into payroll, they stay. The magicians and superheroes that they are, they stay and they find a very rewarding career, and that's fantastic. But how do you get someone today to aspire to come into payroll? And I think that's front of mind, right? What's happening to the talent in payroll? It's shrinking, just like every talent pool. So now more than ever, I think payroll practitioners are focused on being able to convince their organizations that they need to invest in this technology and advance themselves, modernize, but then also, how are we going to maintain? I was talking to a director of payroll recently, and I think they were telling me a third of their teams, this is a sizable organization, a third of their team is going to retire or, finish working their role in the next 3 years. That's a lot, a third. So, and these are people who have been there for quite some time. So I think there's that threat of payroll, especially when you start to see, especially if you're a young person, you're looking, you're seeing payroll at the top of the list of manual things. AI is going to likely replace, but that doesn't mean you don't still need payroll expertise, right? Like we said, for all the reasons earlier around emotional intelligence, it's going to be a very critical role moving forward. It's just going to be a very different role. And so I think all of those things are in concert, front of mind for practitioners, right? Is getting the help they need from their businesses with technology, and then the opportunity to use that to pivot themselves, right? There's going to be a lot of change management and a lot of reskilling going on in that space. And I think the payroll role is just going to be a starkly different thing in the future.
Yeah. There does tend to be, payroll is one of those areas where I think more than any other area, particularly in HR, that there's a lot of tenure.
Yeah.
Right. Once people get in there, they may not have aspired to do that to start with, but once they get in there, they stay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's institutional knowledge so one of the other big things we saw in the survey was that people with 10 or more years of experience in HR, particularly leadership, those numbers were going down significantly.
Yeah.
So, that institutional knowledge gets lost, and there's always significant amount of institutional knowledge in payroll.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, it's so manual. It has been so manual. You're right. You've required a lot of, access databases and, all these things that have been sort of glommed on to make it work. Well, hopefully now the technology is modernizing in a way that you don't need all those things, and you can remove all that human intervention so that you aren't in that position, and you've got much more of a machine enabled process. But yeah, no, it has been that's one key area that I think, all of HR has relied on is people, right? Having the knowledge. And now I think we're going to have to shift to more of a virtual assistant helping us, or a knowledge base with some AI support getting that to us. But that just means we can go off and put our time on something more value added that a machine, could do the other stuff for us. So
yeah, let's talk about AI for a minute. And I don't know, I'm sure you've played around with Chat GPT. We all
totally
have. What was your first reaction, and sort of how do you see that? Are there some specific things that you see as opportunities to disrupt in payroll?
Yeah,
that people could, understand.
Yeah, totally. So I'd say it's already in payroll, right? RPA and AI have already been removing the traditional, what I would call ticking and tying of payroll, right? These line by line reviews, pre and post processing that are pre, during, and post processing that you had historically done, right? All the manual data entry, all of the, manual creations of an entry of things like interpretation and entry of things like garnishments and lodgements, all of that stuff that has historically taken armies of people to do, as well as the armies of people it took to supplement what systems couldn't do. Right. I mentioned the access databases. I felt, as a solution architect in my career, I always felt like there was always one or two people, or one guy in an organization or gal in an organization that was holding together the payroll through this access database. And if they weren't here, what would we do? So now integrations, I think, is making it where you can connect those things that maybe are anomalies to your business. But fundamentally, I think what you're seeing is AI is already in place in terms of automation in anything modern that's coming out, and anything being built new is being built with AI and machine learning and NLP by design. I think right away what you'll see, right? Ernst & Young announced they're using ChatGPT to help with their service tickets. So they're like a virtual assistant style capability. I think it's going to be super impactful when you think about compliance, right? The ability to take massive sets of law and information from all of these different localities and places around the world and feed it in and get insights as to what you should and shouldn't be doing, maybe from a rule-based perspective. Compliance is going to be huge. The ability to surface that to the practitioner to say, hey, there's been this change and you should be aware, and here's how you should, just those sorts of capabilities are going to be big. And then, of course, again, there are already plenty of firms in the marketplace that are working towards zero-touch payroll, fundamentally from using retina scans on time entry to biometrics, other biometrics, to processing, again, straight through with anomaly detection, automated and lifting up to the practitioner if there's an issue, straight through to payment. Is that going to be available and realistic for the biggest companies on the planet? Probably not. But I think you're going to see much more of a machine-enabled straight-through processing for payroll. And now that you have the continuous calculation capability and you have on-demand pay paired with that, payroll is really always on. It's always sort of happening. And I think what you're also going to see is payroll get away from, I think you're going to get to more of a payroll everywhere sort of experience, right? We have not just, before it was very static. You entered your time, you got paid, you got a pay slip, and then nothing happened for a couple of weeks or a month, right? It's very static. You're basically giving your employer a loan for all of your time and your earnings, right? And now what's I think happening is you're seeing employees, obviously mobile first design, artificial intelligence and NLP are helping employees solve challenges for, with tickets, right? We mentioned E&Y and what they're doing with ChatGPT. And then you have to layer in too all of the things that employees are connecting to their pay as it is, right? All the fintech and API driven things, whether that be an Acorns or a PayPal or a Venmo or other financial wellness type capabilities. And then of course, on-demand pay that might be offered by an employer. But the other thing is too, you have employees not necessarily working for one organization. They might be doing a regular job and maybe gigs on the side or just gigs all around. And so I think what you're having is slowly this ecosystem is building around the employee. And as more and more of these things get connected, and more of the open banking style API approach to payroll continues to connect itself, I think what you're going to eventually have is a very orbital, if you will, experience where you're constantly getting the dots are being connected once these things are all integrated in the future. And I think you're going to get surfaced insights to you to say, hey, Pete, that goal you had of saving X dollars or investing X dollars, you could achieve it if you adjusted your taxes this way because you've been doing this at work or whatever, something to connect the dots on all of your ecosystem of earnings and pay and continuously ping you with those forward nudges to carry you to the best decisions, right? Like we're building at work as is. I think that's what the payroll experience is going to be for the end user. And of course, for the practitioner, it's going to be the opposite, right? It's going to be pushing to them insights about that compliance change or helping them activate their data to be able to do those great things we talked about for their organization around strategy. So I think payroll is going to become a very, very always on, always happening, constantly orbiting, insights driven world once we arrive at all that.
Yeah. I never understood, why you had to work 2 or 3 weeks before you ever got paid for any of that work. Right. And nowadays, I mean, there's companies that are saying work today, pay today. Right. I mean, they're literally just to get people in the door.
Oh yeah. It's a competitive
totally different problem.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's those are the types of flexibility enablers though you have to offer now. And I'll be honest with you, earned wage access or on-demand pay often gets, it's viewed as a payroll solution, and it is, but it's really no more impactful to the payroll team than ACH direct deposit, right? To them, it's no difference. But at the end of the day, it gives them a lever to solve problems, make same-day payments for compliance in California when you terminate someone. And better yet, it's a financial enabler to employees that has massive impacts to the talent side of things, right? I've seen, organizations increase retention, engagement, boost their referrals, boost their employee, I just said referrals and retention, same thing, right? Yeah. Bringing people in and keeping them. So it's been a real winner, and it's not really any impact to payroll at all. It's effortless. If anything, honestly, it's more of a talent enabler that is facilitated by payroll. So another great example of how the mobile first API stuff is doing its thing, and it's making a massive impact, be well beyond payroll.
Yeah. I think your comment earlier about, people in leadership roles that have never been in payroll. I mean, the level of complexity and the tentacles that payroll has to everything in the organization are just oftentimes overlooked or misunderstood.
It really is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is an opportunity to say, hey, people go spend a year in payroll, do your time. But
you really should. Yeah. Really should.
I mean, even across the organization from a finance or an operational perspective, it's a great place to start because you learn about everything that's going on in the business in payroll.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, all roads really do lead there when you think about it. I mean, I learned an infinite amount about other areas of HR most rapidly from working and managing payroll. right?
Yeah.
Just touching every process. It ultimately ends there. And so, yeah, you get really good understanding of the inner workings of the HR organization, but you also get a deep understanding of the business itself. So it's very rewarding. It's a very, I would tell anyone it's almost like a summer abroad. You know what I mean? Like it opens your mind to perspectives that you might otherwise not have understood. And I think it creates a much better respect for payroll. I think there's a lack of respect and a big ignorance for what payroll actually does. And it's unfortunate. It really is, because it's incredibly, incredibly valuable and incredibly impactful to the strategy of the business if they can maximize its capability. Data.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
And then there's, just a whole lot of stuff going on that's, I think, particularly around some of the future of the security and those types of things that are going to create some new opportunities. Is there one piece of advice that you would give someone just getting into the payroll world, as they step into it, or, if they're thinking about it, or maybe they're just looking for a job and there's payroll opportunity?
Yeah, do it. I would say do it. Yeah, absolutely. It's literally, and I'll be honest with you, I'm actually about to give a speech about this at the APA Congress. I actually tried to distance myself from payroll at first. I thought, like a lot of people, right? It was treated and viewed as sort of less than. And I thought, if I'm going to be a strategic HR leader, I can't just know payroll. Even though I knew plenty about the other areas, I could hang in there with most anyone. And I understood their process as well. I had to understand them. I would say, yeah, do it, go for it. Even if you only spend a year there, even if you only spend a few years, it's incredibly rewarding. And I promise you, it will more than accelerate not only your understanding of HR more broadly, it'll also accelerate your networking more broadly to understand where you might want to fit into the organization in terms of, hey, maybe my path is going to lead me here. This is my goal, whatever that is, marketing or whatever you want to make up. Or whatever you're looking to do. So I'd say that. And I guess the advice there is learn everything you can when you get there, right? Like that's just be a sponge, learn it all. I think that was one of the things that benefited me well is in the beginning, I just said, I admitted I was young. I didn't know anything. And I said, I'm going to learn everything I can possibly learn. And it's benefited me immensely. I've always been that way, but I'd say that's the way to go. And don't look at payroll as this sort of, less than thing. It's not. It's in fact, it's incredibly powerful, and it can be a huge stepping stone to some great opportunities and really open your eyes to things that you might not have ever even considered by just being behind the scenes, if you will, in the engine. Yeah. So yeah, maybe we need
a new rebranding. Yeah, I mean, your point is well taken, and I think if you leave payroll,
yeah.
And as I said earlier, a lot of people have tenure. So a lot of people get in there and love it and don't want to leave. But if you do leave it, when you get into these other areas, I mean, you oftentimes have this extra insight that others don't have, that haven't seen that side of the business. So
yeah. You've seen the full value chain at that point, right? It really does. It gives you the ability to see how it all comes together and the reality of whether or not it's actually working.
Yeah. And let's be honest. I mean, people obviously, not everything is about money, but at the end of the day, it revolves around the employee, and they have to get paid, right? Yeah. I mean, they have a life, they have things that they need to accomplish. And part of that is, feeling that what's the word I'm looking for?
It's trust, right? It builds it holds the trust between the employer and the employee. Yeah, it really does. And if you break that trust.
Exactly. Yeah. You've got me, right? I'm doing stuff for you. You're doing stuff for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely, I think, a huge opportunity coming down the road for how to rebrand and relook at pay and maybe give people a new perspective about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a lot of great work that's going on out there. All the associations in the industry are really trying hard to boost the awareness of the profession. I know I do my best.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really, and I think people need to be proud of what they do in payroll, and they are, and they do a thankless job. It's we talk about frontline workers. Are they the ultimate frontline worker or what? I mean, without them, the whole economy in the world would just grind to a halt. So yeah, we need to figure out a way to preserve that profession and make sure that it's elevated to the level that it deserves. And yeah, I'm just happy to be a champion for it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Thanks, Pete, for joining us. I think it was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, where can people find you online and on social?
Yeah, well, you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter at Pete Tiliakos. Just look me up with my name. You'll find me. Certainly, if you enjoy these insights, I always try to post and keep everyone up to date on these. You can also find me on the HR and Payroll 2.0 podcast with Julie Fernandez. We post about every 3 weeks a topic on the HR and payroll transformation world. And we split that between my analyst views and her frontline consultant views. So if that's of interest to you, certainly join us there. And of course, you can find me at gxtadvisors.com, where Steve and I are bannered now and out there helping vendors across the marketplace. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I want to also thank our producers, Brand Media Group. I want to thank my marketing team, Lisa and Zoe, who do an awesome job of getting this out every week. And we are just blowing it out of the water with regard to downloads. So we've been super excited every time we get an email from Buzzsprout about our next, getting to the next level. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. We really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app. And if you have a chance, leave us a review or tell us something you'd like to hear about. We'd love to hear from you. You can also drop us a line or schedule a chat on the website. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks, everybody. Take care.